On this episode of The Cave and the Fire, we're starting our second season. Not because the first season is completed, but because there's a whole thread of inquiry that I want to follow, and I want to do it in a second and separate and probably concurrent season. So even as we continue to make episodes that kind of follow the line of the first thread that you've already heard, we're starting a new thread. And the theme for this thread is the role of ritual and ceremony in our lives. Now, I'm not going to get in right now as to what even the difference is between ritual and ceremony, but suffice to say that both are needed. Both are hot and essential and beautiful and glorious, and both can go sideways. Both can become mundane, but that's a conversation for another time. What I do want to do right from the very beginning is to invite you, if you have stories from the liminal places of your life where ritual and ceremony really helped you cross through to a new terrain, helped you in a period of immense transformation, or maybe it was helping you just simply in your own formation on the other side of a doorway that you'd cross through. Whatever it is, let me know. Shoot me a note. We're going to kick off this new series by beginning with the biggest threshold of all, the final one, with my good friend Jeffery Batstone.
I said to her, Mom, we're saying goodbye to you because you're dying. And she said, oh, well, you know, we're all dying. Who knows who's going to go first, right? I said, oh, no, Mom, we know, we have a real good idea who's going next. Right? That's why we're saying goodbye. And her shoulders dropped at that point.
Jeffrey's mom died just over a year ago, and he went into what can be somewhat a sterile environment of a hospital and brought beauty and intention and ceremony and ritual right into that space, along with his sisters and father.
I gathered a few materials. I went outside, picked off leaves that had not fallen off the trees yet, and it was peak foliage in Pennsylvania and just stunningly red maple leaves. So gathered all those things and gathered water and asked the nurses, do you have moisturizer? Do you have a bucket for water? Do you have cloths? And can we use the linen blanket to wrap her in? And they were just yes, and supplied us with all these things. Dad sat at the foot of the bed, and my sisters were on one side of the bed, and myself and my goddaughter, my niece, was on the other side of the bed, and I walked them through what we were going to do. And what we proceeded to do was to wash with water the body.
What I love about Jeffrey's posture towards this entire ceremony, and his sisters as well, was how he used not just kind of beautiful things that they brought in from the outside, but also just the mundane, the stuff that we would kind of discard. And they stepped into the process, doing things that normally we would allow the professionals to do for us.
I let the nurses know, and they brought up the body bag and the toe tag. And I asked, can I put that on her toe? And I said, sure. And so I tied the toe tag to her toe, and can I help put her in the body bag? And my sister walked in at that point. So we helped put her in the body bag, and my sister zipped from the head and I zipped from the feet, and we met in the middle. That was a moment to seal her in that body bag, and just to place my hands on her through that body bag was a moment.
We're going to save all the discussion about theory of ritual and ceremony for another episode, but in this one, you're not going to want to miss as you listen to Jeffery tell the story of how they walked through this entire process with beauty, with prayer, with intention, in a way that I was just tremendously healing and honoring for everyone involved. Enjoy. Well, hi, Jeffery. Good to see you.
Hello, Ned. Yeah, good to see you too.
My name is Ned Abenroth, and Today I get to hang out with one of my dear friends, Jeffery Batstone, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to make death beautiful. I am so struck, just to give a little bit of context with this. I was very fascinated with death and dying, particularly during the years when I was right in the threshold with cancer myself. And it just really stood out to me. And I'm somebody who grew up just going to tons of funerals. How much our culture kind of wants to do everything we can to avoid death and dying. If we were to go back 200 years ago, when people were buried on the family plot out on the farm, the folks in the family would be responsible. First of all, you probably died at home, and then your folks in your family and maybe some neighbors would come help to dig the grave, and then the ceremony would have been done, could have been done right there. And there's somehow that we really lost something when we professionalized the funeral industry, and we kind of like the mass funeral industrial complex, started to come onto the scene. And so now when you go to a funeral, or you go, like, for example, when you go to a burial, I was just at a burial a couple of weeks ago for my uncle, and it's at the family plot in my hometown, but the hole is covered up when you're out at the cemetery with AstroTurf. The dirt that came out of the hole is totally like gone. You don't see the dirt anywhere. When you bring the casket out from the hearse, and it's set on this thing over the hole, but you can't see that the hole is even there. And they don't lower the casket into the hole until after everybody's gone,
Yep.
And so at that time I was doing research, and, ran into a Coney Ranch in Goldendale, Washington, place that means a lot to you and me both, Jeffrey. And at a Coney, it's one of the few natural burial grounds, wilderness burial grounds in the United States, where it's basically, you have 1,200 acres, and maybe 40 or 50 acres have been set aside for the burial grounds. But you can't fully tell, because you're just like you're walking through the forest, and all of a sudden you might realize, there's something quite different about the nature of this space. But there's no tombstones. There might be a pile of rocks here and there to mark, but it still is wilderness and yet not wilderness. And it is a way of burial that is being recovered, not only there, but in a lot of other places around the U.S. as well, but not enough yet. Of course, Oconee is where we hold the Elders' Rites of Passage in Washington. And I remember when we were about to do our very first one in 2018, one of our friends, her daughter died right in that kind of time frame. She was young. She was barely in her 20s, and she died suddenly. They didn't see it coming. And the mother, a friend of ours, comes from, although doesn't really practice Islam at this point, but that's in her roots. And so the body went directly from the hospital to the mosque. And the women of the mosque gathered around her, and they washed the body, and they blessed the body, and they anointed the body, and they prepared the body for burial in ways that they've been doing for thousands of years. And meanwhile, the men, including this young woman's brother, drove out to Oconee from Seattle, and they went out and started digging the grave. And in the Islamic tradition, the body has to be into the ground by midnight, or within 24 hours. And so it was actually close to midnight when they finally got the burial done. It was in winter, and it was in the dark these images, these stories that came from that burial of her younger brother using the heft of the stones as a way of helping him with his own grief. To dig a grave for his sister became like an active form of praise and mourning. And the physicality of it, I think, served him. And there's some about that story, about her story, that has captivated me ever since. Henry Nouwen, he says a line that I think he's not the only one to say it, but he talks about that, one of the final gifts we have to give is to give away our death. And of course, I can hear that in two ways. One is that we're giving away the process of dying, giving away our death and dying, which is something that might unfold over years, right? So there's certainly giving away our continued diminishment. But there's also, it's giving away the death itself and all of the ritual that surrounds it. The death itself can be a final gift to everybody around us. And most of us in our culture, because we're so deprived, and I think it might be especially within Christianity, Jeffrey, our buddy Howard, who's Jewish, and I went to his mother's burial, and it was in Seattle area in the middle of the city. And they lowered her in a simple pine box into the hole in the ground. And then the cantor chanted these Hebrew songs while all of us who were gathered around the grave used shovels, and it wasn't a symbolic like handful of dirt onto the coffin. It's like we stayed there with the chanting until the hole was fully, filled back in. All the dirt was put back in. So, I'm hearing these stories from my Jewish, buddy, and from the Islamic tradition. I'm like, God, we are so starved within Christianity in the U.S., especially as we've kind of handed over all of the dirty work to, to professionals. Mm-hmm. So that's all background to say, Jeffrey, who's been, involved in a lot of these escapades, he and I together have found ourselves in. And Jeffrey, you even buried a dear brother elder out at Oconee.
Yeah, that's right.
Not that long ago, one of the elders in our community. But you just found yourself entering the death of and the crossing of the threshold of your own mother back in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. It was Philadelphia, right? That area, at least?
Yeah, just outside of Philly. Yeah, Quarryville. She was in, yeah.
And you're in a hospital room, which can be so sterile. And somehow you managed to, not just you, but you helped your siblings and your father and other family and friends weave beauty through that whole process and make it so sacred. So I wanted just to hear the story from you, because I think it's something that probably a lot of us would be interested in hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That the story of digging a grave, I had always had a fantasy of digging my own parents' grave. And over the years, that didn't seem like it wasn't going to happen. But man, I was holding on to it. And just for that, I think, as I understood my own fantasy as the years went on, I was just like, man, the work and the toil of opening up the earth to lay mom or lay dad into the earth. So to be that close, I think right up through and into the end, I had intention of being close and wanting to be there as my mom passed. And she's been in decline for the last 2 years. So when I got the call, booked a ticket, and the next day we were out there, I was out there and circling up with my sisters in the hospital room. And I brought with me a few items that I knew would help along the way. And some of it, and actually I brought more than I even used. It was more than a few. I grabbed this, I grabbed that. Well, a couple of the things I grabbed a singing bowl and books of poetry, and I grabbed some icons, and I grabbed placemats, and I grabbed oil, and just these things that I'd used in some grief rituals before that I knew would assist in some way of marking the time. And I said the singing bowl in particular really just resonated throughout the week. No particular pun intended there, but its sound just brought us in again and again to the moment we were in. When I arrived Sunday, my father's heart had also failed. So my mom is on oxygen. She's on forced oxygen. And my dad is in the same room. We're in the same room with my mom and my dad. They're both admitted to the hospital. And the nurses have snuck their beds in with one another. And we know that when we take that oxygen off, she'll be in a steady decline. And when she was sort of taking it off herself over the night, and her oxygen levels would drop to 70. When we got there that night, she perked up. She died of interstitial lung disease. Her lungs couldn't get enough oxygen, and she had been unconscious for days leading up. But she perked up, and that evening, I FaceTimed in my family, and she was talking and engaging. We were singing songs, and every time we'd sing a song, we'd ring the bell. And we sang another song or ring the bell, and we'd have some interactions. And she was blessing people and really enjoying us surrounding her. And at one point I turned to her and I said, Mom, and she'd been suffering from dementia for a few years now. So she was still quick and still alert, but she couldn't remember names all the time. And I said to her, Mom, we're saying goodbye to you because you're dying. And she said, oh, well, we're all dying. Who knows who's going to go first, right? I said, oh, no, Mom, we know, we have a real good idea who's going next. Right? That's why we're saying goodbye. And her shoulders dropped at that point. And I don't know if it's some of the dementia or some of her own hope of just continuing on. But at that moment, she just looked around and realized what was going on. And she said, well, I guess I'm going to see Jesus. And so I pulled out from behind me another piece that I had brought, which was an icon of Jesus. I said, well, look who it is. And she goes, oh, it's beautiful. Look at him. And that moment passed. We sung another song and said goodbye she said final goodbye to my children and my wife. And she rang the bell a whole bunch. We have a video of her ringing the bell, which is really sweet. And then this icon of Jesus laid on her lap for all through the night. She held on to it and it laid on her lap. And she actually later in the night ended up peeing on Jesus, which became this wonderful last interaction with Jesus on this side of life. She's had a deep faith throughout her life, but we also began to refer to that icon and Jesus as Pee-pee Jesus from there on, and the levity of that, as well as the honoring of this engagement with her body and this person that's meant so much to her, carried us through the week. That icon was around all through the week, and her marking of that. As I've told people that story, there's a whole thing out there on sterilized or urinated Jesus.
Yeah, the piss Christ.
Gotten into it.
Yeah.
Piss Christ, that's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, for those who are not familiar with icons, there's the notion comes from, especially within Orthodoxy, that somehow an icon is more than an image. It's a window. It's a medium that makes available, like it's a window into another realm that makes whoever it is in the image immediate and available in a particular kind of way. So, I mean, I love, of course, I mean, in my own languages, Jesus is there even without the icon, but there's something that is incarnate within the wood, and icons are not painted. It says they're written. When you're making one, you write an icon, and it's a very sacred, prayerful process as an iconographer becomes used by spirit to incarnate somehow into the wood itself, or in whatever it is, the material they're using, this image that then becomes immediate. So I totally.
But I'll tell you, one of the nurses came in the next day, and after Mom had passed, and that icon was up, leaning up against the wall on the window, and she was an Orthodox, Orthodox Christian. She goes, "Well, who? This is an Orthodox icon," she said. She looked around the room like, who in here knows of this icon? Really taken with the fact that it was in the room.
Yeah.
So just the gravity of it even being in the room.
Well, and I appreciate you able to tell the story of your mom, urinating on it without any shame, because there's so much, I think, that we have such a split in our world of sacred and profane and dirty and clean. And somehow, and death can be incredibly dirty, quote unquote. Not, it's not really, but often people will, when they're dying, they'll have their bowels will release. It's not. This is a very fleshy experience for breath to be released out of the body and spirit as well. And so, just to be able to honor, as you told the story there, to say, all of it was sacred and belongs, and even the urine itself, that the last water to pass through my mom.
That's right.
And there's something holy about that too, and so that may we all have eyes to see kind of the fleshiness of our bodies falling apart as holy, not as something that we need to have a reaction against. So. Yeah, so kind of pick the thread back up on the story.
Yeah. She, as we said goodnight, and she began to fade during the night, and then by the morning time, and I'll tell you a little bit of what I was doing during that time. Is my dad's on one bed, and I just have a hand on him, and I'm saying prayers, singing over him quietly throughout the night, as my mom's in this other bed. Right. And my sister's curled up with my mom, and they're just sort of chatting slowly. And we spent most of the night just till probably 3 a.m. there, and just tending as needed tending. And I think we dozed off for a few hours. And when we woke, Mom wasn't conscious anymore. And I began to realize, oh, that's it. That was last night was the last time we'll really talk to her. We'd also had they didn't want to be on life support, and essentially the oxygen that was being forced into her is not just I forget the device that they use, but it's not just that nose. It's a whole forcing oxygen is basically acting as a life support. So she didn't want to be on life support. So at 9 o'clock we took off her cannula, I believe it's called. And she woke up for that and had a big, there was some fear there, as she, really faced death. To me, that's what it seemed like. She woke up and spoke of, don't let me fall. Don't let me fall. Really elevated and shouting for a while, and we surrounded her mom. It's okay, we've got you. We're here. And she was probably also oxygen starved at that time, so we gave her some morphine, which helps with oxygen starvation. And she settled in, and then for the next 6 hours, she slowly, her breath just left her until she breathed her last breath. During that time, we were so close around her bed, and we eventually moved my dad into her bed, and so he was holding her, and it was my two sisters and my niece surrounding the bed. My brother was also joining from Los Angeles on FaceTime. He was there, and we were just touching her, and we'd go through these moments of needing to get up and get somebody to eat or go to the bathroom, to then these contracted moments around Mom of beginning to thank her. And it was really a litany just unfolded as we thank you for being a gardener. Thank you for all the desserts you made. We list all the desserts, and it just began to, this beautiful liturgy began to flow out of us of thanksgiving, of thanks, as well as we remember those things. I mean, just the grief of her leaving. And this being the end.
Martin Prechtel, author, a shaman, somebody who studied with the Mayans, lives now in New Mexico, a true elder. In his work, he talks about how in the Mayan language, the word for grief and praise it's one and the same word. And that there's this notion and their understanding of things. And it gets exactly to the crux of what, with praise and thanksgiving, and then the grief coming up at the same time. That for them, they are two sides of the same coin. That you cannot praise authentically something that you wouldn't grieve if it were gone. That if you wouldn't grieve its absence, it's just flattery. It's not authentic praise. And then on the other side, that our grief itself is the highest form of praise for that which we've lost or for that which we should have had but never did have. So I'm so struck that your thanksgiving was grieving and your grieving was thanksgiving. Your thanksgiving was praise. Your tears were praise. It's all one and the same, and we can kind of tease apart it and call it different things in different moments. And it might have felt differently at different times, but that's all one thread of a bigger weave, so it's so beautiful just to know kind of what you guys were doing at that moment in the story.
Yeah. At one point, and I think it was pretty early in the morning, I thought to myself, okay, I wonder how should we gather around Mom, and maybe I'll invite us to thank Mom for all these things. And it's something that felt really awkward, and we were kind of already gathered around, and so I just started in of thanking, and then there was this chorus. It was just overlap. Of oh, thanks for this, and so it doesn't take much, right? Like just to offer some form and just to push into this moment that's so pregnant and so full, right? That it's right on our hearts, and we might not even know to give thanks, but that is just what to do right there, right? And then it opened up is the opening for the floodgates of grief and praise, and that carried on.
So at that point, you're in this place of both of thanksgiving and grief, and then I imagine at some point you came to the moment of death itself.
Yeah, and there were moments in between the Thanksgiving where we were speaking of, like, one phrase I was using is walk on, mama, walk on. Move into, you're doing great. It's so hard to surrender, right? It's good, hard work to surrender, right? Just encouraging, and we'd join in chorus in that way and just be encouraging her. And in the hours that we had of this thankful grieving, by the time her breath was really shallow, and then there was such a hush, and we were almost right there in her breathing, right? I mean, we were just all breathing with her in these moments and whispering even to her in those moments of, we love you, right? Go on. We love you. And a sense of releasing there of you've got this. It's really encouraging her there. And as she breathed her last breath, there was silence and stillness. And we stayed in that for about 45 minutes. I mean, not complete silence and stillness, but just around this hush. There's a moment there where she was there with her breath, and then it was no longer. Yeah. So we waited with her until that last breath, until she was breathing no more, and then just stayed in that place for about 45 minutes. And that was enough just to stay. There was some talk at that moment, do we call the doctor in to pronounce her dead? And there was no rush. There was a really supportive hospital, which we're really grateful for, Lancaster Medical. We marked the time of death, and then eventually about 45 minutes later, we invited the doctor in, and they marked the time of death, which they took our word on it of 3:28, which is a lovely honoring of our own holding around her. Yeah, and then we moved from that moment into an invitation, of which what you referenced earlier, that burial out of Coney that we did with Jim Olson. That was last year. And a similar ceremony that we've done with grief bodies in rituals, and I'm talking grief bundles that we create in ritual, not an actual human body. I invited siblings and my niece and my dad into, would you like to do something like this? And they were all like, yeah, that sounds really appropriate right now.
For context, they've never done anything like this. This would all be totally new and in some ways out of left field for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I appreciate is that it's so natural to want to do this that they can fall right into it to say again, it wouldn't take much, and there you were. It wouldn't
take much. Yeah.
So carry on.
Yeah. So I gathered a few materials. I went outside and picked through the hospital flower beds, picking flowers, and a little concerned that somebody might come out and shoo me off, but I was ready to let them know my mom just died and I'm picking these flowers, whether you like it or not. And Mama's a fantastic gardener, by the way. And I also picked right off leaves that had not fallen off the trees yet, and it was peak foliage in Pennsylvania and just stunningly red maple leaves. So gathered all those things and gathered water and asked the nurses, do you have moisturizer? Do you have a bucket for water? Do you have cloths? And can we use the linen blanket to wrap her in? And they are just yes, and supplied us with all these things. Dad sat at the foot of the bed, and my sisters were on one side of the bed, and myself and my goddaughter, my niece, was on the other side of the bed. And I walked them through what we were going to do. And what we proceeded to do was to wash with water the body. And we took off her clothes and used some cloths to cover her breast and her crotch. And then the rest of her body was exposed. And we ceremonially washed, which means we didn't have to scrub her down, but just brought a wet cloth of water all along her face and her forehead and her neck and her shoulders and her body and her legs. And we had started off, and there was some talk of, oh, look at this scab here, and this is where she fell. And I offered one more invitation. I said, another invitation is we do this in silence. And that really shifted and we later talked about that with sisters and niece were grateful for that, because all the uneasiness that we can just start chattering and talking about, we just had to hold that and pay attention to, this beautiful movement that was happening as we honored her body. And so we washed it down, and then we moisturized her body, and then that oil that I had brought, we anointed anointed her. And I particularly wanted to anoint her belly, where I came from, where we all had come from. And that was really meaningful to me. And then my goddaughter painted her toenails. So I held her feet, and she painted each one of her toenails, which was something that they had done many, many times with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And something to go back to the night before. She had come in and painted my mom's fingernails, and they had a lovely moment. And then we wrapped her in this linen and wrapped everything but her face, and then brought those flowers over and just gently poured the flowers over her. I handed out a maple leaf to each one of us. We surrounded her with these maple leaves, and then each one of us placed at the same time a maple leaf on her. And so we had her body wrapped with flowers and maple leaf, is beautifully laying there in the hospital room. And then right at the tail end of that, some dear friends came into the room. They were able to join us to lay those maple leaves on. And then we sat around and sat around her body and talked about her, the day, about how the day had unfolded, catching their dear friends up, and talked about what might be next. And and it was pretty normal conversation about plans being made as we were talking around the body.
Mm-hmm. You know what I mean, on one level, it's so countercultural for us to do the kind of thing you just did. You know, in most, especially Christian American deaths, once the person has died, it's kind of relatively quickly whisked away. Pronounce
the death.
Yeah.
Right. Time of death, and then roll it out of the room.
And then if there's a cremation, that might be the last time you ever see the body again. If there's going to be a burial, it might be embalmed, it might not. I mean, but it's not so strange what you were doing. I mean, the other cultures do this, even here in the US. I mean, in the Jewish tradition, of course, you'll sit Shiva for, a number of days. I mean, I want to say even up to a week or more in mourning, and somebody is always with the body. The body's never left alone. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of, as the person, is really kind of journeying from this incarnation across the threshold, that like you would not leave their body to be, in a way where it's not being stewarded by somebody, on this side of things. And I wonder also just the beauty. I'm so struck by the beauty of how honoring it is to tend to this vessel that your mom inhabited for 7 decades. Like even the kids who were there, or and for your sisters, they probably didn't see that coming, and for them to all of a sudden to step into this without maybe a lot of context, how'd that land for them?
Yeah, what I heard afterwards from them, and your question, I'd love to hear more, but what I heard was just gratitude. I'm so grateful we did that. So grateful. Oh, I'm so thankful we did that. It was just this, and that honoring and tending to brought comfort, right? Yeah, and this maybe that countercultural piece, which can be counterintuitive as well. Like as we move towards death in this dead body, that tending to her dead body and honoring it is deeply comforting for us. So I heard that as well. So grateful. And, she's so beautiful. So gratitude again and again. Yeah. We also had the opportunity then, and in part because both my dad was admitted to, then we knew we would see her body again. We would have a viewing at the cremation. There was some unknown, but we're pretty sure we'd see her again. So he did say goodbye. And we brought her into the next room, which was his room, right? So we had these 2 hospital rooms side by side, which was a unique experience. But in that room, they came, and before they came, I just got to be in that room with her. And I circled round and round in a counterclockwise way, to sort of my own way of releasing, of helping her release, of helping send for 45 minutes. I was exhausted at that point. So all that I could do is just walk, just walk and be with her. And when I was ready, when I let the nurses know, and they brought up the body bag and the toe tag, and I asked, can I put that on her toe? And I said, sure. And so I tied the toe tag to her toe, and can I help put her in the body bag? And my sister walked in at that point. So we helped put her in the body bag, and my sister zipped from the head and I zipped from the feet, and we met in the middle. That was a moment to seal her in that body bag, and just to place my hands on her through that body bag that was a moment. And then the morgue workers came up, and they come up, and they're wheeling a body through the halls. They come up with this frame that has a tent over it, has a sheet over it, and they take that off, and there's the tray that will then go into the refrigerated box down in the morgue. And so I helped her onto that, and then they put the tent over her. When I stepped out into the hallway as they wheeled her down, and just watched, and it was so good for me just to watch, just to stand there and watch her go out the exit, and then around the corner, and then the automatic doors closed. So helpful. I'll have that image with me for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all these moments where I was just able to be intentional about spending a little more time, not rushing it, just watching her wheel down and just staying and watching, witnessing.
Mm-hmm. I so appreciate you kind of owning your agency to participate, and not having it, using it's not just the flowers and the sacred oil, it's the zipper of the bag, it's the toe tag, it's loading the body, it's the very mundane details that are just part of the process that you said, this too, I'm going to step in and be present for, and not letting yourself be, robbed of any chance to to really be part of what seems like maybe a one long ceremony that happened when you and I first hugged at the airport, or even before that, all the way until your flight there, the whole thing.
That was such a gift.
Yeah, that was
for the listeners. We got to Ned and I were in the same airport for 15 minutes, the Seattle SeaTac.
Yeah.
You were coming from a funeral, from your uncle's funeral.
That's
I was
right.
going to a funeral.
Yeah.
So adopt the posture of yes. That is a helpful guide in these moments.
Yeah.
So what can we say yes to? What can we say yes to? What can we say yes to?
Yeah. And I'm so struck too of the image of you circling your mom. Knowing, both you and I, of course, parents, like how many times we carried our kids in walking in circles when they were little to try and put them to sleep. And in the middle of the night, I've spent hours doing circles. And to think of you being able to do that for her on the other side, that's just so beautiful. So,
I love that connection. In that moment, that's another. In part, I didn't know what to do in that moment. And I took out my prayer beads, and I took out, these skulls I have. But I was so tired. I didn't have, and it was really the simplicity of it that just stuck with me later of, that was so meaningful, just to keep walking around and around and around and around and around.
Yeah.
There's a real simplicity in everything we did. But with intention. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the cremation, because this was something you and I spoke about before. I mean, it was not, you weren't going to be able to bury her. And I know that was something that you had, part of you had been hoping for. But what I love is what you did instead to, I've never heard of somebody embracing the cremation itself as a sacred ceremony that you were fully involved in. Walk us through kind of that, what that ended up looking like.
Yeah. Mom died on Monday, and we had the funeral on Saturday. And this part that you're talking about was about 40 people came to the viewing of the body and the witnessing of the cremation. That was on Saturday morning. And then we had a larger service Saturday afternoon with a couple hundred people. On Wednesday of that week, I went and met with one of the funeral directors. And as we talked through what could happen there all the way up to the incinerator, I just kept asking him, can we do that? Can we do that? Can we do that? And he kept saying, yeah, all the way up to like the pushing of the buttons on the incinerator. Right. So again, like some of the simple movements, but it's intentional. The day before the witnessing of the body, sent out an invitation to the 40 people that were coming to go out and make a gratitude bundle, a grief bundle, go out into the land, go outside into nature. Mom loved nature. What is it is there something out there that as you gather, and the invitation was to gather something, to make something beautiful. And while you're doing it, maybe begin to engage with Ruth Ann, with Mom. Thank you for ... Or I remember when ... And so as people came to the viewing the next morning, one of the things that I did ask the funeral workers, stewards to do was to stand at the doorway and engage each person, and with these words of go slowly, go gently, and breathe. Go slowly, go gently, and breathe, which I talked to the guy at the end of the time, and he's like, oh, I'm going to take that with me going forward. We have people just rushing through these doors, just getting inside, and they need something to really stop and slow them down. And so as people arrived, they were met with that, and then they brought their bundles in and laid them on Mom, and had opportunity to interact with her body. And we had also gathered a bunch in case people weren't able to go out onto the land. And so people were making their own and coming up, and really began to create this semicircle around her body. And we had bought the urn that she was going in as well. And so the urn was in the room near the body. And once everything had been laid on to her body, we gathered around in a circle. And I invited everyone to extend their hand out towards Mom, and just begin to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And this chorus of thank you. And then one more time, extending their arm out and saying, onward, onward, onward. Right. And then I came out and I had a thurible,
What's a
holder of incense.
Yeah, better say what a thurible is.
Yeah, it's you'll see them in Catholic churches a lot, or high liturgy churches, where they swing this ball back and forth that has burning incense in it. And so I sensed her, went around the body, sensing the body, and had bowed and sensed and bowed again as I finished. A little funny side note, my dad was sitting right at the head with Mom's head, And he kind of looks up as I'm done sensing, and it's frankincense and myrrh, which is a lifting of the spirits and a grounding of the spirits, right? Lifting her onward, grounding her body here. Also does the same for us, right? Lifts our spirits, grounds us into the grief. My dad looks up and he goes, "That stuff stinks," which is totally something my dad would say. Yeah. He was utterly himself right there. Yeah. And everybody just laughs. So everybody just laughs because it's so him. And then my sister took the urn, and we knew we had wanted to create a connection. We wanted to bring the urn back to the funeral that was later in the day. And so we just wanted to create a connection with her body and the urn before she went into the flames. Right? And so she came and bowed and then just walked around her body, holding the urn over her body, making this connection. And all of this was unspoken, not explaining anything. And then we gathered one more time, made this, everyone got into the circle and we sung Amazing Grace. And then, as many verses as we all knew, I think we left out a last verse. Then I invited everyone that was there that wasn't a grandchild or one of the siblings to go outside and to make 2 lines going into the incinerator. The incinerator was in a carriage house outside. And I had instructed the funeral directors to help them make a line here. And so people did that. And they made this honor guard that we were going to walk through to the incinerator. And so the grandkids gathered around Grammy's body, and we processed out of the funeral home I was swinging the thurible in the front. The urn was following me, and then my mom's body, all the grandkids pushing it, and granddad, my dad following close behind with siblings helping. And we made our way out and into this carriage house, which is a clean, neat, big garage with an incinerator in it. And we were told beforehand, and I checked it out Wednesday. This isn't fancy. It's a industrial piece of equipment. We processed her out, and the incinerator doors were closed, which was intentional. And we moved her body from the gurney onto these rollers, and which is how they get her into the incinerator. We stopped there. My brother opened the door, pressed the button to open the door, and the door of the incinerator opened, and the glow of the fire, you could see the glow of the fire. They had started the incinerator, they're kind of warming it up. And so her body is there, and the door is open, and we read a Mary Oliver, part of Mary Oliver's poem my sister read out loud. To live in this world, you must learn 3 things. To love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your life depends on it. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. And I gave a nod to the funeral director, and they pushed her body on the rollers right into the incinerator. And my brother pressed the button, the door closed, and then my dad stepped up and pressed these 2 buttons to start the incinerator process, which gets up to 1800 degrees. And we lingered there for a while. And people hugged, and that was a really poignant moment for me. As her body, just before she went in, I looked around. My wife was a few people away. I asked her to come over, and she wrapped her arms around me. And and this beautiful grief song came out of me there. Beautiful to me. It wasn't beautiful to everybody else. but so grateful. I howled there before we pushed her into the fire. And what I heard later was my dad said, "What's that noise?" My brother was right next to me, like, "Well, that's grief coming in and out and through Jeff." And he goes, I want it to stop. Though it was disturbing beauty. I'd say it was a grief song.
Oh, there's lots of little moments of resistance here and there. And I think, it honors the human experience to tell those moments too. This is not a smooth, straight road. And so all of those things, belong.
That's
and
right.
There's not
That's right.
whatever is arising for the people there is what you work with, and is what to be welcomed and honored and befriended, and not to say, "Oh no, we got to do it this way or do that way." It's
that's
trusting,
exactly
trusting
those
what's
moments.
emerging.
I'd say one of my roles that week was this grief steward, just helping my dad, right? And really just affirming, like, "Oh yeah, of course you want it to end. Of course you want that song to end. Yeah, of course you do." Right. And in the few moments that I didn't, there was one moment by her body, right, that stands out. And he's like, "Oh, she's so cold." Right. And she was refrigerated. Right. And he's, his wife of 60 years is so cold. She's so cold. He's crying. And I said something that I thought would be helpful. Right. Wasn't very helpful. Right. I was like, "Yeah, she's gone, Dad." And he's like, "I know that. She's just so cold." It was like, "Oh, good. You're right into it. That's right." Like right into like, "Oh, yes, she's so cold." But most of just tending to grief all through the week is yes, this is horrible. Yes, this is, oh, of course you want it to end. Yes, she's so cold. Right. Yes, your heart is breaking. Yes, our hearts are breaking. Right. All of it, whatever's coming up, all of it belongs. Right, including PP Jesus, right? All of it belongs, right? Yeah. And the other image that came to me that week was rounding out the corners. Some of the ways in which we move out of grief that throughout the week, right? Of, "Oh, I don't want to think about it anymore," right? And it could have said, "Oh yeah, just don't think about it anymore." But since it was rounding out the corners of, "Oh, of course you don't want to think about it anymore. It's horrible," which brings us right back in, right, to the grief, rather than this exit strategy of, "Yeah, let's get away from it. Yeah, don't think about it anymore. You've had enough." Right. So again and again, just steering back into, "Oh yeah, this is terrible. This is hard. This is beautiful. This is, really sad."
Yeah. And I think what we can say about that is that, we're not doing, we're not turning back into it to be hard on ourselves or hard on each other. It's because that's where the healing is. If we, this is one of the reasons we would do that.
And the love,
That's
right?
where
That's
the
where
love is. And that that work has to be done, or it's gonna harden within us. And so to move, to stick with it, to allow it to move through us, we're gonna have a far more robust sense of healing and wholeness and grace if the more that we can give ourselves to the depth of it. And it's when we kind of just choose to distract, choose to numb, choose to stay on the surface, that I think we're setting ourselves up for, like, it could be years or even decades of suppressed grief that, and at that point, there's no more chance to wash the body. There's no more chance to close the body bag, to watch it get rolled down the hall. There's no more chance to, to make beauty with grief bundles and to say thank you and to close crematorium doors and to hit, push buttons. It's like all that is available in this very liminal moment that is unlike any other time of life. I mean, this is so utterly other in some ways to our normal day-to-day life. And so
those images are the ones that have been, that image particularly of my mom being there right before the fire and going in has continued to help me work with my grief, my sadness throughout the weeks. I've come back and just cried over that image again and again, and just ever so grateful for it, right? To be right there in those moments. Yeah. And that not being stuck in me, getting stuck in me.
Yeah. We haven't really talked about the memorial itself. I don't know if, that if there's something there, this is the part that people have the most familiarity with. And they usually skip everything, most of us skip everything that you've talked about so far. And we kind of get right to the memorial, as if that has to carry an awful lot of water, if that's all, that's all we've got. Were there any highlights around the memorial itself that you felt where you kind of gave yourself freedom to think about it in a different way than, the vast majority of other memorials that you and I've been a part of?
Yeah. In part, my mom was she created worship services, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of worship services for churches and ceremonies and weddings and all sorts of things throughout her life. An accomplished pianist and a great musician. And so she had already created her funeral in part. And we looked up on her laptop and found a document from years ago of here's the songs that I want played. And so what we did actually was go into one of her old worship services and just use the structure there, which was lovely. And she knew some of the people she wanted to talk there, and Dad knew some of the people she wanted to talk there. So some of that was just plugging in stuff that she wanted. And we got to jump in and join as singing and playing songs and reading poetry and inviting folks in. Each the siblings did each one of those things. I think one of the things that was missing for me in between the witnessing of the creation, the viewing of the body, and then a few hours later with more people, right, was her body. Right? We brought the urn in, so that was really important. We were planning on doing that during the week, but at some point during the week I said, what would be helpful, what would be connective to me is if we had a picture of her body covered with all those flowers, right, up in the memorial service, right? And so we had that shot in mind even while we were at the funeral home at the witnessing of the body. So we had the urn in the background and her body, and I took a picture of that, which we then projected up onto this big screen. And the start of the ceremony, Dad processed the urn in. He brought the urn in and laid it down in the front, and it was there underneath this picture of her. So that connection felt really important. Honor her body, that connection, and where eventually her ashes, just a few days later, we went and collected her ashes, will be in that urn. Yeah, and then I think that was a pretty more familiar memorial service there, where we're singing hymns, and my brother sang a U2 song that doesn't happen in every memorial service, and the grandkids sang Johnny Cash. That doesn't happen at every memorial service. So there was a few things that were fun.
Which I ask you about, not because the novel is somehow better than the familiar. It's not. There's a reason why there's certain things we want to happen at a memorial that will be utterly, we'll see it coming from a mile away, and that can really serve us too. So, just to make sure we know that it's not that you need novelty for the sake of novelty. It's more, I think, how can we imagine, how can we use our imaginations to help us in our work? And so I love that.
You know what? For my part in particular, I appreciate that, Ned. For my part in particular, I tried to weave in. I got to stand up and honor my parents just by saying, I am Jeffery Paul Batstone, son of Stu and Ruth Ann Batstone, and said, my name means God's peace. And they gave me that name. So all of that was meaningful for me, and just in this declaration. And then I sang a song that my mom had taught me to sing when I was 4. And really that was, for me, there was a place of even terror growing up. And my experience of singing in front of groups it wasn't necessarily for me as much as it was for my mom. All right. And so there's some wounding there that I experienced growing up that I've tended to as an adult in order to get even my singing voice back. And so offering this song that came out of a place where there was wounding in me was powerful for me to step into my own work there. And the song is "Welcome to the Family" is a song. And what I appreciate, where I think that was coming from as I grew up was, welcome to the Batstone family in particular, right? And there was an idealization of my family growing up right there that came from within my family and was supported outside my family, right? So seen as these icons, beacons of light and hope and good people right within the community. And we had our problems just like everybody else does. But as I invited people to sing this song along with, it was a welcome into not just, as we were singing on Mom's deathbed, this welcome into a much bigger family, right? Imagining the welcome that she was getting, right? But also as we are welcomed into God's peace, that we're welcomed into a much larger family, and to the family of things. I quoted there Mary Oliver and letting people know in this Presbyterian Reformed tradition that they did not have to be good and they did not have to repent. So there's some coyote work that I was doing there, which was fun for me, and that they only had to love with a soft animal of their body, right? And as they enter into this peace and into this family. So that was some of the play that I had in the midst of that.
Well, thank you. So incredibly grateful for time and the story, the chance to hear from, really the whole thing. And I'm kind of sitting in wonderment about how this story is going to continue to unfold within your siblings and within your kids and within the family and the community. And I know we don't have time to get into it now, but even within the folks who worked at the funeral home or the nurses, they were all, I know from other conversations, they were all impacted, of course, by this incredibly beautiful way of moving through death.
Yeah.
And I love how, your mom may not have intended for this, for her to give her death away in this kind of way, but there was like a willful communal giving of her death to everybody present, and even people who are hearing this conversation who never knew Ruth, but that somehow Ruth's own story. It's kind of some trickster energy.
Ruth Ann.
Ruth Ann's own story that she gets to, give a blessing even in her passing.
Yeah, that's lovely. There's one more story I want to tell, and some of it is because it feels so outside of the week, and yet it held the week. Gosh, I mean, as I talk about holding the week, there's so many, there's so much that held the week. Prayer held the week big time, both through the week, but man, in the community and friends and family that was outside of that was significant. When I heard about mom's health going downhill earlier in the week, I posted online a picture of the singing bowl with a red maple leaf in it, happened to be, and Randall Mullen's poem of Dying in October. And that was it. It was a post online, and it was for me to sort of anchor into, okay, this might be coming. And then that singing bowl, right, came in, and Mom rang the heck out of it, and we rang it, right? And then the next day, this prayer book that I just love, the Celtic Wheel of the Year, has a prayer for every day of the week for each month. We gathered around each day that week, and I'd ring the bell, and we'd pray this prayer. Right? of the day. And some ways it was, it could be offensive. Some of the prayers was like speaking of life when we're in the midst of death, right? And often it spoke of death too. But that, as we rang the bell and said the prayer and rang the bell to close the prayer, that happened all throughout the week. And towards the end of the week, I was realizing, I think this bell needs to stay with my dad. Right? Every time we'd ring it, he'd just cry. That's all I needed to do is ring the bell, right? And just start weeping. And so I asked him one morning, I said, I want to leave this. I want you to have this bell. And he said to me, I don't know how much I don't want that. Knowing, like, he's like, every time I ring it, it's just I start weeping. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I want you to have it. So we said a prayer that morning. His good friends came in town, and his friend at the end of the prayer was like, I love that prayer bowl. It just brings me right into presence, right? And I turned to Dad, and this is a few hours after I'd asked him about it. I said, Dad, I want you to have this until you die. Right? And he said, okay. And he accepted at that point. So I think it's a combination of his friend speaking into it and having a few hours. But so now that bowl is next to Mom's urn, right? And helped build this this altar there. And I asked him about it a few days later. Dad, have you rung that bowl? No, I haven't rang it yet. And so it's just this beckoning, it's this call of this something simple, right? But that just carried us through the week and made these grounding points for us during the week. We'll continue to bless and continue to anchor him around that altar. Yeah.
Well, on that note, why don't we end with this poem?
Yeah.
A poem I know that I think is just coming up for me in hearing that final story. It's by David White. The sound of a bell still reverberating, or a blackbird calling from a corner of the field, asking you to wake into this life, or inviting you deeper into the one that waits. Either way takes courage. Either way wants you to be nothing but the self that is no self at all. Wants you to walk to the place where you find you already know how to give every last thing away. The approach that is also the meeting itself without any meeting at all. That radiance you've always carried with you as you walk both alone and completely accompanied in friendship by every corner of the world, crying, Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia.
Hallelujah.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me into this.
Yeah.